I remember it like it was yesterday. I was downstairs absolutely bored out of my mind making the meanest turkey sandwich alive in the middle of the evening. The year is 2016. Naruto was pretty much wrapping up its main story adaptation, and back then I wasn't nearly as tuned into the seasonal anime structure as I am now. I wasn't watching as much as I could have, nor was I keeping up with fresh news. The only thing I did know was that I was ready for something special. Something new that I would enjoy and grow up with for years to come that would overall inspire me to come into the world of content creation. Now, bear with me for a moment, but you all know on YouTube, they sometimes have those playlists of anime OPs, and earlier that evening, I was going down memory lane. A little crossing field here, some AOT there, etc, etc. Eventually though, that initial playlist completed, auto-playing the next song in the queue, and what played was an OP I had never heard of called The Day by Porno Graffiti. When I first heard it, I thought to myself that yeah, it was pretty decent, but for some reason I played it again and again and again and again, and next thing you know, I was hooked. Upon searching, I learned that it was for this new superhero anime that thankfully was on Hulu. Of course, with Marvel at the time on the rise, everyone was having a blast with all media superhero related, myself included. So with sandwich in hand downstairs on the biggest TV we had, I decided to check this show out. The funny thing about fiction is that you never know what story will end up meaning so much to you. I never really held a piece of fiction so close to my heart to the point where I didn't mind getting emotional. Heck, the thought of such a thing never even crossed my mind. Yet little did I know that I was about to experience such and be put on a ride of a lifetime as I sat down and watched those first 2 episodes. I like to believe that there is no such thing as a perfect series when it comes to every story beat's execution being flawless. But there is such thing for a series that is perfect for who you are as a person and your taste. For myself, being a high schooler at the time, that series was My Hero Academia. All things considered, Horikoshi is kinda a genius for creating a superhero manga during the hype of Marvel media, especially when his story had such significant Western influence. We were introduced to this vibrant superpower society and a kid with a heart of gold that landed on the unluckiest percentile of the population being a powerless individual, or in universe described as quirkless. I know Deku is not everyone's favorite flavor of main character type because, to put it simply, he came off much more emotional and, well, a nerd, but these traits among many others ended up being the aspects that rallied a lot of people behind him. You saw him get bullied, you saw how his mom shed tears and apologized that she couldn't undo the reality he was having to confront, and most important of all, we saw this kid have a dream to be a hero. As far as the shonen template goes, I think we all could see where the story was headed, but what made My Hero have some serious oomph to it was that question of what does it mean to be a hero? Is it to bear the hopes and dreams of society on your shoulders, to be the strongest there ever is so that no darkness will ever eclipse the light, to always be that person that inspires others to keep going, or maybe to simply be the light in someone's life when nobody else acknowledges that darkness? A hero can come in many forms and ideas, and from comics to various different manga down to the people in our lives. Our definition of a hero is as vast as the things that move our spirits. When you had somebody like All Might, this incomprehensible symbol being the literal pillar of society, his presence certainly shaped a lot of future heroes. His ability to win with a smile, to always put people's minds at ease with the phrase "I am here," to always be one of the first people to rush out to save the day. He was a living legend, and to Deku, he was everything. So much so that even powerless, he was willing to put himself in the line of danger because one's quirk doesn't define man, but the will to help one another does, just like his role model always has done. It would be that fire in his heart that would change the course of his life forever. Episode 2 has one of the best moments in the entire show, with All Might not only seeking Deku out, but telling him that his actions managed to inspire him, and in that, he found the person that would carry on his torch, delivering the message that Deku thought he'd never hear from his role model, that he too can become a hero, that he is worthy of stepping into that very ring among his peers and pursue that very dream of his that he almost gave up on. This is a moment that truly touched the hearts of millions, because for those of us out there who create, who pursue a hobby, who practice every day to perfect their craft or sportsmanship, who want to turn that dream into reality, we too all want to feel like we can make it. If everybody could have one of the greatest leaders in said occupation tell them that they too can reach the top, then who on this earth can really stand in your way outside of yourself? As somebody who wanted to make content, seeing this lit a fire in me to one day become a content creator worth people's time, to strive towards one day being able to sit down with some of the greatest out there and discuss this medium with the best foot forward, to inspire somebody else to pick up the mic and discuss this medium. All of those things I want for myself and my legacy. Inspiration is so powerful that it can move someone to tears, and seeing Deku break down knowing that he's finally at the starting line, that was a special level of heart that resonated with me. Of course, it didn't all come so easy. Deku had to get in shape and even pass the practical exam, which gave us our breaking limbs issue, but with One For All and All Might at his side, all I wanted to do was keep seeing this kid grow, and he wouldn't do it alone. A superhero academy for his story to take place, a teacher like Aizawa who was dedicated in support of these kids' dreams, classmates like Ida, Ochako, and Todoroki who would become crucial to the story's expansion among the rest of Class 1A. Everything just fell into place nicely, and week by week we saw Deku begin to really stand tall, which gradually expanded upon his relationship with Bakugo as well. From the bully who needed to be humbled a bit and grow as a person, and from the timid boy to the one who would stand on equal footing with his childhood friend. The two who walked on this path of win to save and save to win would affect the entire class in due time, and the way they affected each other is honestly one of the best parts of the series when, you know, you actually pay attention and not insert headcanon. By the time I finished episode 2, I found myself immediately in place for the next episode going forward. I knew that this was the series for me, and despite the highs and lows that would come, I'd see this experience to the end. From the costumes to the chemistry among various characters to the growth and motion for these students and teachers, so many people were getting on board and finding their love for the series, and it would be best to do so while the community was still growing. Now, it would be some time before I really did get involved into the online community and such, so during the time I was viewing on my own, the one thing I remember waiting on during season 1 was for that episode to air. The episode that would use animation to its highest bar possible and get everyone's attention. The MHA staff thankfully had this coming way ahead of time, and funny enough that alongside the climax of season 1 knocking the wind out of me, little did I know that a lot of the momentum that would propel My Hero Academia forward would come in the form of a song. Like I said, back then there was a lot I was not keeping up with, composer names included, but you best believe that after watching the climax of episode 12, did I make sure to forever engrave the name Yuki Hayashi into my brain. From Death Parade to Haikyuu, and across the medium's many genres to live performances, Hayashi would carve his name into music history among what many would describe him as one of the best there is. There is a similar page taken out of his time shine with Haikyuu applied to My Hero Academia, where you can feel the hype of a climax in your veins through his music. But among the many songs he has created, Yusei Run took over the anime community on an unprecedented scale. I don't even think he expected such a turnout, but the amount of times I replayed the fight just to hear the song should have put me in the rubber room. It was so good that till this day, people still use the template Yusei Run goes with everything among various different fights and moments across other series, proving just how flexible of a song it is for all types of different fights and climaxes. With the same level of usage and love for Black Clover's Haruka Mirai, Yusei Run would truly be the song that lets you know it's time to pay attention. It probably sounds crazy out loud, but this is also one of those songs that has such a perfect momentum to it that you could close your eyes and just see in your head how a fight would play out. It's got the build up to let you know the time is now, it's got the ramp up to give the action some breathing room, the trumpets to really emphasize the locked in sequence, and the final wind up for that climatic final push, and it just keeps on giving. I always enjoyed seeing people do their wordplay on why this song was called what it was, as typically when you hear the innocent say run, that is when the hero comes rushing in, and with All Might's arrival, his fight against the Nomu made us realize just why this society looks up to him so much. Countless blows, that classic shonen feel of pushing past your limits, what else could you need in this fight? With the presentation and music going as hard as it did, if you didn't hear about My Hero Academia at first, you'd certainly hear about it after this fight. From reactors to all sorts of anime content creators, it was everywhere. The idea of going beyond condensed into the phrase plus ultra, and as cheesy as it did sound, the show really knew how to make it look pretty damn cool. Yusei Run ended up being spaced out in the series pretty widely even among the movies, but this song wouldn't just make an impact, it would serve as the blueprint for those special episodes that we would seek out for years to come. Among the dozens of OSTs I had heard at this point in my life, this one really taught me a lesson on how important and powerful a good song can elevate a scene, as this was a fight that truly went beyond. At this point, the series had gotten the anime community's attention, but with that, we then arrive at a much bigger question, and that's what it would do with that attention. Among the many ideas Horikoshi could have executed, the result would be an arc that resounds proudly in the demographic, and from here on out, the momentum of the series would only go up. Tournament arcs have been part of shonen blood before many of us were even born. Countless fights, moments, and characters etched into anime history. There would be no better time to be a fan of a series, and with season 2, it would be MHA's turn to follow suit with the UA Sports Festival. When it came to superpowers, there can be a variety, and the best way you can show a range of them would be through an event that would pull together your cast and then some. What was already a pretty large cast got even larger among the introduction of Class 1B, who would be 1A's friendly competition. We met characters like Shinso and Hatsume who sought to stand out for different reasons, and plenty of bigger things were brewing for certain characters of Class 1A. As this tournament served as the prerequisite for a pro hero internship, giving it your all on this stage was imperative for everyone, especially Deku being a successor. And the best part was that there would be multiple ways to do so. The sports festival would bring multiple challenges, a race, a cavalry round, and then the one-on-ones, giving us multiple showcases of how everyone's quirks can be used and combined with one another on top of their motivation, and there wasn't a mark missed. Even with characters like Todoroki and Bakugo having the edge in mobility, Deku's strategies would end up pulling him ahead with the greatest home stretch of an upset he could do in the race, using the traps on the course to his advantage, and even back then, people had many comparisons to that of Spider-Man because of his smarts, and the cavalry round would continue to show how deep in his bag he can get, especially when the odds are stacked against him. Rather than creating a team full of powerhouses, he went for a team that can maximize utility. For a lot of teams, it came down to the wire, causing some pretty bold moves. But little did we know, we were about to be introduced to one of the most important plot lines in the series with the Todoroki family plotline. Arguably one of the best to come from Weekly Shonen Jump, introducing that gray area within the world of MHA. Abuse is a very sensitive topic that Horikoshi chose to navigate through. And while Todoroki was doing everything in his power to make a point to his father, for Deku, this was a classmate he could not ignore. Season 2 episode 10 was the fight you just had to be there for. Everything we loved was put into one climatic showdown. Deku going to extreme lengths to wake Todoroki up from this nightmare. But when his words finally got through, not even I could predict who was going to win this match. Though one thing was clear, this was the episode that MHA told the world that it is here to stay. Deku may have lost the match, but he won where it really mattered, and the best part was that everybody was tuned into this season to see it. Whether they were there the day it happened or have joined along the ride across the years, reactors and tons of content creators have always been moved by this episode, and it shows that Horikoshi really knew what he was doing. That insanity by Deku was genuinely moving people, and you didn't have to be a fan of him to at least acknowledge that what he was about was really great. And as he began to control his power, he would only get better. At this point, the series was in full sprint, but at the same time, the narrative was also sprinting towards the end of an era and the beginning of something new. Going into season 3, I began to finally find the place where I felt I belonged. I met a lot of new people over time and really began to discuss the series in that community space. One thing for sure is that I truly came at a perfect time. Season 3 was a monumental turning point for the series, bringing the events that would conclude Act 1 of the story. Let me say that I think it is infinitely easier to get people hyped than it is to bring them to tears. There are blueprints for excitement when it comes to shonen, but never in my life did I expect to see so many people emotional for the events of season 3, and even I really began to open myself up. Towards the end of season 2, we continue to see not only that gray area for the world of MHA expand with the introduction of Stain, but also that the villain society began to make moves as well. The League of Villains would end up being a very formidable antagonist group that over time we discovered had layers of characterization, all of them having different bones to pick with the society that failed them. The training camp would introduce us to one of the MHA kids, Kota, who while having a displeasure for heroes would ultimately have his life saved by Deku. You'd think that right after season 2's biggest fights, the bar would rest for a bit, but there was no time for that. Deku had to put his life on the line to save this kid, to the point where even he was accepting that he was going to die that night. People were tore up inside about this fight, and if you didn't think it couldn't get much higher, then how about we kidnap Bakugo? Things were getting out of control. Society was uneasy, the pros' hands were forced, and with All Might on the scene, there was only one person who could truly stand against him. All For One had one hell of an introduction. You had the one person that All Might struggled to rid the world of finally resurfacing when there is so much at stake. Society's balance, UA's credibility, all of it was on the line in this fight that would be decided by morning, and you best believe that Deku was not going to sit still while it all went down. There were so many parts of the narrative to sink your teeth into, and one thing that truly stood out was the idea of one's origin. Why a hero or villain continues to persist will always withstand the test of time. That conviction led to the second event that you just had to be there for, with All Might versus All For One. If there is one thing that is true, it's that you're not watching My Hero Academia for the fights, but when these characters do fight, you are given a front row seat to some of the most intense and well-constructed storytelling the series can offer through this conflict of heroes and villains. A lot of which can start from an age long ago. In this same conflict, we're finally given some more context into who Nana Shimura was, and in more dreading context, the connection she had with Shigaraki. Those weaknesses through connection were all for one's biggest strengths when it came to confronting such overwhelming might, something in which another superhero show touched on quite well among various occasions. It may have been just a few blows exchanged, but it's what was at stake that made everything hit so much harder. Even when injured, even when his secret was finally exposed, society didn't even attempt to lose hope in All Might, and it just goes to show how crucial not only his presence was, but how important him winning that day was as well. For everything that he had done and stood for, the one fire that could not be extinguished was that in which came from his origin. Seeing everyone root for him made you feel like you were in that crowd, and sure enough, many of us were rooting for All Might to come out on top. There's a long list of satisfying blows in anime, and the United States of Smash was joining it. It goes under the radar a lot, but my favorite part in this episode is honestly the brief last words from Nana to All Might. Do your best always hits home, because your best is what anybody should expect from you in this world, but for All Might, this was giving it his all. Even if it wasn't flawless, Act 1 of MHA concluded on a very special note. It's hard to take away from the series when it plays to its strengths, and despite All Might being finished, this would only be the start of Deku and Class 1A's journey. 11 volumes in, and I'd say that we had a pretty good future ahead of us. Now it really is Deku's turn, and from Season 4 and onwards, we would really begin to see just how he holds his own in an era where the symbol of peace is no more. Season 4, I feel, expands the emotional horizon of the show into various new storylines that carry themselves all the way to the end. With All Might's retirement came a major shift, and now was the time for everybody to step up to the plate for both the heroes and the villains. If Koda's story was already something you enjoyed, then Eri sure enough was not going to disappoint. Horikoshi really kept the MHA kids consistent, but I believe he was making a point of how a lot of who you are in the present is decided when you are young. Eri's story managed to take that same level of rooting we had for All Might and shift it towards Deku and Lemillion for one main reason, and that's to get that child to safety. Nobody messes around when it comes to the well-being of children. There's a reason why we talk about listening to them and not hesitating to act. All it takes is one time for something traumatic to happen, and unfortunately, even the heroes relate to it. Her abuse and neglect had been going on for a long time, and despite the bigger picture, having to let her go when she was right in Deku's arms was not an easy thing to do. And in a time where Deku's position as the current wielder for One For All was called into question by the illiterate side of the MHA community, the one thing he could do to quell all of these thoughts was to act. Act for the well-being of Eri, act even if it meant going against the future that Night Eye saw, which would set up theories about All Might's potential end. The beauty of heroism is that you don't wait to find out if you'll win or lose to help somebody. You quell that hesitation and decide everything through your actions. And little by little, everyone's contributions amounted to Eri's safety. Kirishima working to overcome his past, giving us one of the greatest sword and shield matchups. Mirio going straight for the goal, willing to not only fight alone, but to persist even if it meant giving up his quirk. Because as I said before, the power has nothing to do with the spirit, and Deku giving it everything he possibly could have as the last line of offense, leading to the anime's intro of Might Plus You and one of the best sequences in the show, with Deku reaching out to never let that child go. Saving Eri is what it meant to win in this case, and of course we get an even bigger surprise towards the climax with Infinite 100, which was an extremely clever way to give us just a taste of what late game Deku would be like, blue hair and all. And I know people will have some very strong feelings on the movies. I mean, trust me, I've seen them all, but being able to go to the theater and see this essentially ran back with movie 2 was honestly an experience I'll cherish as well. As much as everything shonen related is a competition these days, there is a certain level of joy you can find being surrounded by friends and strangers that share a common enjoyment for the series you love. And even if some poor logic was present, I still think it was a fun what if. But I'm well aware that fun is not really allowed around here. But even with overhaul defeated, the job wasn't done yet as we take it to the cultural festival, aka the real media literacy test of the series. There is plenty of room to talk about Horikoshi's shortcomings when it comes to a lot of the school related arcs, but this was definitely not one of them. We met Gentle Criminal, who despite walking that tightrope was still a good person deep down, and only somebody like Deku would be able to confront him and make sure that he avoids that one final decision, the decision that he would not be able to walk away from. Their conflict may not have seemed like imminent danger, but what was important that day was saving Eri through something only a child can truly benefit from, and that's joy. The importance of a smile has constantly been reinforced in this show because saving somebody is more than just physically. There are mental scars that people remember as they grow up, and if they couldn't alleviate that from her, then she would never truly be free from her past. Something in which Endeavor would also be confronting in this season through working through atonement. The damage he has done will always remain in the Todoroki family, but even so, he had to walk hand in hand with that being the current #1 as well. We do not like Endeavor for who he is as a person, but we do enjoy the writing that conveys his struggle to do something that actually matters, even with his family unsure of the type of relationship they want with him. His fight against the high end closed us out on one of the best presentations in the show, but the most important thing was his final words in the sky. This new age without All Might had to fight to establish itself, and as we prepared for something much bigger on the horizon, we'd all be paying close attention as Act 2 was in full sprint. Now, technically, this should be the part where I go to Season 5, but if you notice the next section title, there's going to be quite the tone shift. So, before I get to that point, I want to talk about my favorite arc in the series, that being the Paranormal Liberation War. At this point in the series, I was already in college, and believe me when I say that this was the absolute best time to be part of the weekly discussion. All these years of steady build-up, key plot lines, and pending fights all came ahead in what was described as MHA's Infinity War. I gotta admit that it was damn near impossible to escape the manga leaks as well, especially with the growing popularity of things like TikTok. But every evening, I was there to see what explosive developments would happen, and sometimes the results would be pretty ridiculous. And yet, all this was proving was that Horikoshi was in his deepest bag ever. Even other fandoms or people who would not give My Hero Academia a chance would be tuning in just to hear about how crazy things were getting. More and more people were convinced to give it a fair shot, and a lot of people who fell out of love with the story became reinvigorated come the anime's adaptation of the war. And there was a certain level of satisfaction being able to see all of our theories and discussions about what needed to happen come alive in real time, full of so much nuance and complications that show just how flawed hero society was. It was as if somebody gave Horikoshi the golden pen because his art just kept on evolving and his narrative developments kept on delivering. From the tragedy of Hawks vs. Twice to Shigaraki's defiance of death and one man arming everybody, all while Makia's rampage set in motion a convergence point, the chaos just rapidly grew, and for a long time we didn't know how this war was going to end, but that made the weekly anticipation so much more fun than it needed to be. Think of the stretch of 264, 270, 272, 274, 281, 282, 284, and 285. Dabi was outtrending the presidential election, for God's sake. Everywhere you looked, My Hero was cooking. I was having an absolute blast with my friends, and this community experience was everything I could have asked for. And don't even get me started on how much much of a fool I was acting when chapter 306 dropped. The amount of agenda that I was pushing that night was incredibly unserious. I think it's fair to say that everybody's expectations on the conclusion of Act 2 were absolutely blown out of the water, and from here on out, the world of MHA would never be the same. So you'd think that coming off a major war arc and getting the final act announcement that we'd continue to have a really good time. As much as I wish that were true, at least for my experience, this is when things get really complicated. There are always highs and lows when it comes to a community experience, and with MHA, there came a point where I told myself that I need to wait for this very video to talk about the major low point, as the behavior was so poor that it's no wonder that the anime community in general has such a negative perception when it comes to online discussion, especially when it comes to shonen series. To be completely honest, this was something long overdue from me. So with that being said, please know that this is the truth. Not only is it my truth, but as this is my own personal experience, I will not sit here and pretend that everything was always in good spirits. To ensure that we are all on the same page, I want to shift my focus to the anime adaptation of Season 5 and the time period of the manga being in Act 3. These 2 points in time go hand in hand, and it'll all make sense. A lot of you all probably wondered, why in the world did I gloss over Season 5? I mean, we had Deku's incoming quirks, My Villain Academia, the gem of the series, and all the context leading up to PLW. Don't get me wrong, very important stuff, but the community experience with both the anime and manga at the time would be the most dreadful experience imaginable. And for my anime only folks who have no idea what I could possibly be talking about, allow me to fill you in. Going back to Season 5, the way the anime was supposed to play out was the adaptation of Joint Training, My Villain Academia, and Endeavor Agency in that order as Horikoshi created them. However, that never happened. Instead, we got a very alarming arc switch, putting My Villain Academia at the end of the season and Endeavor Agency beforehand. The reason being to more or less align the show up with the airing of Movie 3's events. Firstly, this right here rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I don't think it was the best move narratively because you needed MVA context in order for certain things to click in Endeavor Agency, and the end of the season tends to be worrisome as whether or not quality will hold up. To add insult to injury, a lot of Joint Training looked quite well done, and I already knew that if this level of quality wasn't going to be shown with MVA, then we were going to have a lot of people pretty pissed off. On top of this, I would also like to mention that there were plenty of critiques of MHA's anime adaptation, mainly with things like mood, atmosphere, and the blue sky. I'm not here to say whether or not those reasons were valid or not, but just know it was a consistent complaint. It is important to note that when it came to the anime's adaptation, the show's backgrounds were not in-house by the MHA staff. They were done by another group that they will be working with, nicknamed Musa to keep it short. I'm sure there have been instances where you all have seen people quote-unquote fixing MHA's background, and the debate upon the reality of anime production versus people's patience began to start colliding. Fast forward to My Villain Academia, and the issue was still present, and it would frustrate people immensely because the movie backgrounds are night and day. Keep in mind that the movies were done by another subsection of Studio Bones, so that was done in-house. You would have questions like, well, why doesn't the MHA staff just drop Musa and do it all in-house when they are clearly capable? As an assumption, we know that MHA coming back every year is really not enough time, and so in order to take some of that workload off, this partnership that spanned all these years would manage to keep on producing results that can be hit or miss, but let the staff channel their focus. This isn't to say that the backgrounds were bad the entire time, because there were plenty of great showcases, but it just wasn't consistent enough or had enough variety for people's liking, especially in key moments. The way people engaged in this criticism, however, was absolutely insufferable. Not because people had complaints, but because because every year we spun the same wheel over and over again. And the worst enemy of those who cared about why things the way they were people who did not care and simply wanted their products to be of higher quality. Or maybe they did care, but they still wanted a better product. Both sides were valid, but it did not change the fact that every year they would argue over and over, prompting frustrating slander and ultimately a conversation that went nowhere. But what could I do but simply watch, because at the time I wanted to just stick to my constructive side of things and not bicker. Over the course of My Villain Academia, the debates about the anime got to a critical point, and the situation that would truly begin the worst of times would be the Chancered Vincent cut. I have mentioned this many times in the past, but just to refresh, Chancered Vincent is an excellent animator who recently has widely been known for all the work they did during One Piece's Wano arc. Vincent was able to get a chance to swing by the MHA staff for a bit, but things did not work out 100% perfectly. On screen here, you can see his original idea for Toga's rush during her quirk leveling up as she started using Ochako's zero gravity. The final result, however, was a lot different. The outrage to this was so massive that Vincent spoke up about it. It already didn't help that a lot of people were very fed up with the anime, but Vincent tried his best to get people to understand the reality of the situation, notably saying that the trim down is something that happens every day in many anime, and that sometimes when it comes to corrections and such, that the result can be something different. I'm gonna say this a lot this portion, but after I read this, what came into mind was that this was the reality of the situation, and it unfortunately happens. If every animator could go and bring their best results only, I'm sure that they would, but that never happens. Such is the complications of animation, but despite his words, it did not matter. Because in the eye of the consumer, the only thing that matters is the final result. I say this because no matter how much you think a lot of people may care about the production of a series, it only matters when it produces hype results. There is no empathy when things go wrong. After this, the level of anger from the community rose to a point where people would argue about almost anything related to the anime. You could see the sides forming as if the criticisms manifested into that of a knife and split the community down the middle. The most disheartening thing about all of this was watching real people talk to each other like they're not human beings over a fictional story because they disagree with one another. During all of this, despite how I felt, the one thing I would tell myself is that I am not fighting strangers or my peers over fiction. No matter what your stance was for the story, whether we agree or disagree, I was going to treat everyone the same, and up until the very last chapter and episode, I did just that. I do not see the value in trying to make sure my opinion is the end-all be-all, because who am I amongst billions of people? Due to me trying to play kumbaya with everyone, however, I ended up in this really frustrating middle ground position. I was listening to both ends of the scale. I'm sure some of you all are thinking right now, why the hell would I do that? Why not just lean towards the side that really mattered to myself only? In which I reply that if there is one thing I wanted to value so dearly at this time, it's the idea of perspective. It would have been so easy for me to find a space where I hear everything I want to hear, but as a content creator that was still trying to figure things out, I felt perspective was important. If you love the story, tell me what's hitting for you, and if you are disappointed, let me know what's amiss for you. I felt perspective would be important for me to not only grow, but also help me consider different avenues of thinking, because if there is one thing the anime community is known for, it's hive mind mentality. I wanted to be an example that whether you agree or disagree, we as anime and manga fans can be civil about this stuff without being so harsh on each other. In this though, I quickly realized that I underestimated people's passion, because when that fire burns bright, it rages. No matter what I did, it wasn't gonna change how the community was acting, and it just got worse and worse as time goes on. For months, I pretty much observed the worst that a pocket of anime and manga fans had to offer, from misinformation to harassment, and it stemmed from the fact that our disagreements fuels our agenda. In real time, I watched many productive discussion makers and different creators walk away from the space. Friends turned to enemies practically, people who despite being positive or critical of certain things, be categorized and therefore mistreated, all based on what side of this divide you were thrusted on. If you enjoyed the story and anime during this time, you were considered a glazer who shouldn't be expected of much, and if you were critical critical about things. You were just a big hater who got a kick out of making sure people knew MHA was not hitting for you. I saw so much aggression towards people that I wouldn't even want for my worst enemy, and most of all, I struggled to maintain my peace. This is when I really understood the powerlessness that comes with participation. The one thing that stands true in all anime communities is that there is no leader. When you choose to participate in a space that you did not create, you are powerless to stop the momentum of the conversation, whether good or bad. You just have to sit there and watch it all unfold, and that's exactly what I did. I know I talked about season 6 pretty excitingly, and yeah, it's still my favorite arc, but all of this carried over into that season as well, especially as we were in Act 3. Now, as we flip to the manga, let me say this now, that I do not think MHA was a perfect series. Again, it was perfect for the type of consumer that I am. Considering Act 1 and Act 2 were overall pretty great, I was bracing for Act 3 to have some fumbles. I just didn't expect this divide to be present or for Horikoshi to make choices that would feel like betrayal to many people. The final portion of MHA is the definition of some of Horikoshi's biggest and also some of his most controversial. Starting all the way in Villain Hunt, there were just so many choices that frustrated people more and more, and at the same time, there were many who felt like this was MHA's peak. We had debates about the lack of introspection from Deku, the arc overall being a bit too short for people's liking, and then chapter 327, which funny enough is my birthday, was the chapter that made everything twice as bad. Again, I'm not here to rule out whether anything was good or bad, because I'm overall mixed, but with those two sides, you can see the clash coming a mile away before a chapter even dropped. Everything that I am saying right now continued all the way to the end of the series, and to make it worse, my own negative thoughts gradually began to creep up on me too. Let it be known that I was still enjoying My Hero Academia, but I was walking hand in hand with that criticism as well. I have made a solid amount of content discussing Act 3, one of my longest streams can attest to that. I talked plenty about the good and plenty about the bad, but for some reason, enjoying a story while discussing its flaws was just an option off the table. Even I would get flack for just enjoying myself sometimes. If I said that I enjoyed something within a chapter, sometimes people would do the most annoying passive-aggressive stuff, saying comments like, "This would've hit in a better story," and I sit there puzzled because what do you want me to do with that information? I cannot help you or the fact that you are disappointed in Horikoshi. Take that shit up with God, man. And if I had some criticisms on another series, like say JJK, I would also get flack for it, simply because I'm an MHA fan, as if I weren't also being critical of my own story too. Do we see how much of an absurd circle this goes in, and how frustrating it can be when it's towards something you genuinely care about? I may have not been as harsh as other people were, sure, I can agree to that, but I also didn't sit there and pick and choose when to apply myself. Again, didn't matter, just constant bickering to the point where my voice slowly became silent. I stopped speaking out loud about the series I enjoyed. I stopped tweeting about the story so often. I went back to consuming the story the way it was intended on Sunday and just going about my day. It was miserable for me to be around this community. I ended up disconnecting for a few months and consuming media like Monster and Madoka, and ended up making videos on both because not only were they fantastic series, but I needed to remind myself that I can enjoy stories by myself again. Maybe I'm just wrong for trying to value the community experience, knowing how it is to be in this space, or maybe even in my best efforts to see everyone and how they felt, I still underestimated everyone's tolerance levels and how disappointed they were. As much as I could just chop it up and say Horikoshi should have just wrote the series better, I'm not relevant enough to decide whether or not a story is good or bad in the eyes of everybody who consumes it. The bickering at this point are full-on arguments daily. The slander rose to the point where people weren't even trying to engage with the story honestly. It didn't help that everybody was basically consuming the story from leaks. I mean hell, JJK leaks are back in full swing again, as if we learned nothing from the final chapters of both these series. And from the severely undercooked mutant discrimination plotline to the complications of Deku's final battle, I just gave up. People did not want to have a conversation anymore. At this point, majority of my friends just took turns each week beating the story up, and I knew it was time to not even mention it around them anymore. It was the same cycle every new chapter. I walked away from certain spaces, certain groups, and I ended up befriending somebody who I thought I would never end up so close with, sharing those similar feelings as we just silently observed week after week. Through all of this, I had a painful realization that I was suppressing my own passionate self because I didn't want to go down that road. And yeah, despite all of that which I've said about being better, and even though this is my fault because nobody asked me to be like this, I should have just tuned it all out. But here's the biggest truth of it all. I wasn't mad that creators like Oceans, for example, created a video that was him rightfully voicing his opinion on MHA at the time. I wasn't mad that people had differences in opinions. What I was mad about was watching the place that you felt you belonged in become foreign to you to the point that you don't even recognize it anymore. The space where you thought you could have constructive conversations turning into the equivalent of a vapid echo chamber. And if you think it can't get any worse than this, then let's talk about the shipping. Listen, I know that everybody gets a kick out of seeing some of their favorite characters romantically involved with each other. It's not a bad thing to be invested in love, but when it came to this series, I firmly believe that this atmosphere was not suitable for such a thing. But then again, one could say that about the entire demographic. This was the first time I really got to observe a portion of the community who solely consumed the series through a romantic lens clash with those who are here for what the author wrote. And let me just say this plainly. Some of you out there are not well adjusted at all. It's a bit scary. The behavior about these ships was escalating far beyond a passionate point. To be blunt, when it comes to the MC and the women lead versus literally anything else, the friction is always insane. All it does is continue these year-long streaks of misogyny and homophobia that is exuded from these communities. It wasn't everybody, obviously, but the vocal minority tend to be what is called out the most, and that tends to be what's put on blast time and time again. I felt I just needed to be quiet about the whole thing because in the online world, people will take a statement, twist it, and assume they know your entire character before even trying to get to know you. Bakugo and Deku shippers have pretty much been going at it with people for as long as I can possibly remember, and for the Deku and Ochako crowd, you aren't any better. A lot of you guys were waiting for something like chapter 431 just to turn around and use it as ammunition to dunk on people. All around stupid behavior. No matter how you view it or how you feel about these sides, the tragic thing about all of this is that we consumed a series for many years. Hell, for a lot of us, the full 10, watching a story talk about what happens when two sides do not understand each other, and all we did was repeat. And sure, this obviously goes beyond a fictional story, but you'd think that people would try to be a little more self-aware. Everyone's trying to get the last word in when realistically, you'll never overpower somebody you won't ever break bread with. It was already bad enough that people did not want to engage in discussion about the content we were getting, but with this, we're just adding on to the plate. There was so much anger and disappointment out there that certain false narratives about chapter 431 sparked even more friction. And surely we can just take a moment and realize how ridiculous this is. There is always going to be somebody ready to rain on your parade, and when you're dealing with the idea of the crowd of people who are here for what the author chooses to write, coexisting with those who will write things like fanfics or make headcanon, it is bound to invite friction, especially in a space where people have a hard time protecting their joy as is. And even then, there's a lot of spiteful and hateful people out there. It's incredible how we treat each other so poorly for such trivial reasons, but I know that this is how it is, this is how it will continue to be, and let's be honest, it would be naive of me to expect otherwise. And even then, my idea of trivial can mean the world to somebody, and thus the cycle continues. So yeah, this section was a major shift, but I felt like I needed to get this one out. As much as I cherish the ride for the series, I will never get involved in another fandom-like experience of this magnitude ever again. I think I'm better off doing my own thing, and if people so happen to like that, then they tag along with me. There is one thing I want to admit, and that's if I could go back and change one thing about my behavior all this time, I would go back and butt heads with people to say what was really on my mind, and at least then I would have known how people really felt about me, and if certain friendships died off, at least I'd know that it would have been for the best. better. Despite the frustrating atmosphere, despite all the critique and criticism, I knew that I was going to look it all in the eye and still enjoy this story. I can't quantify how much this story means to me, but I also hope people understand that I wasn't mindlessly enjoying it either. I liked what I liked and didn't like what I didn't, such as a reasonable fan. It's not often that somebody takes time to really talk about their community experience, nor is it often that I am so transparent. I know this can all be summarized as extremely chronically online behavior, but I just hope people understand that I truly cared. When you create memories, it's not so easy to walk away, but in the end, I needed to be the one to simply put my enjoyment over what anybody else has to say. It is the most important thing after all, and it's something I never should have let become tainted. And as the final seasons were near, I adjusted my gears for one final time. You only get one chance to complete a ride like this in your life, and as we neared the end, I made sure to not only depart on my own terms, but to do so in peace. Despite how you felt up to this point, knowing that the final battle was upon us and that the end is near hit us all differently. It's always a weird feeling having to accept the fact that you're about to depart from something you grew up with. And with Horikoshi's momentum at the time kinda zooming, those final chapters would be on our doorstep before we knew it. Of course, there were still a lot of decisions that had some sparks here and there, from Star and Stripes to the traitor plotline, and like I've been saying for the past 20 minutes now, I had my gripes, but I'm not here to elaborate on every single one of them now. In these final days, all we wanted to do was to hold on to the reasons as to why we were still here in the first place. The Todoroki family plotline, Ochako's faded confrontation with Toga, Bakugo's character arc reaching its completion, and most importantly, to see that struggle of Deku wanting to save Shigaraki till the end. Over the coming months, the battle that would decide it all would take place and conclude another story within shonen history. From the setup that would bring in all the options and characters that we've been dying to see get more spotlight, to the developments we knew were imminent based off all sorts of build-up and previous details. Every other week, we were bouncing around to different locations as Horikoshi would push himself to the limit to tie these stories up in a bow one by one, and while there is plenty of room for discussion, when you look back at all of this, it's hard to say that you weren't at least entertained. And for many people, that's all they needed to be. From the splitting up of these fights Naruto Shippuden style, to Yue going sky high while Deku rushes back, Endeavor versus All For One leading into some of his best reflection, his most heaviest regrets, and hardest of pushes to get the job done. The Todoroki brothers duking it out in one of the most heavy episodes in the series, proving time and time again why this plotline stands triumphant, and how determined Todoroki was to freeze the bond in place that his brother wanted to burn up so badly. The action and emotional impact just kept on climbing, leading into Bakugo shifting the momentum of the war as we knew it, and one of the most daring decisions Hori made for the series. I will never forget the day the chapter that benched him dropped, and for the episode, it struck even harder for those who would never see it coming. Nobuhiko truly brought out the best side of Bakugo's character that really hit home for people, and watching the reactions to this big episode reminded me of something so important. More than anything, if what you consume still moves you, if it still evokes emotions in you that you rarely express, if you are vividly reminded why you stuck along with the story all these years, then that is what mattered in the end. There is something there that still calls to you, and that is something I think creates a unique experience. I won't sit here and pretend like I didn't have some issues around the complications of what came after, but from Deku's arrival giving us the final quirk to the war arc having an entire second half, Gento, Shiketsu, Nagant, there was nothing forgotten to be used where it could have, giving some major combos that felt like a dream, and capping off more and more character stories. Horikoshi really, and I mean really, leaned into some crazy stuff to wrap up these battles. Many would say it's fan service, others wish the series had more of these things early on, but with so much on the line, you just get absorbed in these characters' selfless actions. You find yourself rallying behind behind these heroes, how the people who made bad choices were inspired to do better in Japan's darkest hour, and that if you can still move, then it's not over yet. Todoroki and Ida coming full circle from the Stain arc, speeding across multiple cities on an ice jet to stop a supernova, allowing Todoroki to finally bring this nightmare to an end and allow him to truly become his family's hero, and which would cap off his story that was propelled on a different path the day Deku reached out. Ochako's story being one with her quirk awakening, making her gravity finally have that area of effect that I wished for such a long time. Not only doing everything to accept Toga in an episode that felt like the peak of MHA's drama, but then accepting her own feelings for the person that meant so much to her, and memes aside, seeing her radiate that insanity to go so far to understand somebody that the world didn't even consider human. That level of empathy will always hold a special place in MHA's narrative, because even the littlest expression of it, even if it doesn't make sense, can reach someone. There is nothing like watching a struggle to understand one another, to reach one another, be so captivating, as human nature is so complicated given its indefinite shape. And on the other end of the scale, the former symbol of peace would step back into the fray, reining in the curtain call as our final two battles would be at our doorstep. I know All Might coming back is controversial, but again, I'm just not doing it. Seeing All Might pull a Iron Man had people flabbergasted, as nobody would have expected to hear I am here one more time, and at last, Deku and Shigaraki could finally focus on themselves. Season 7 was already going strong as one of the best seasons for MHA on a visually strong basis and a narrative that spoke for itself. And before you knew it, then came the final season. This would be the MHA team at their peak, as for the first time since season 1, it would only be one core. And coming off movie 4 especially, I'd like to imagine that all hands were on deck. This meant something to them as much as it meant to us, as the baton from season 7 to season 8 was passed for one final time, bringing us back to Porno Graffiti to send us home, and Bump of Chicken coming back since the likes of the Pokemon Day music video to hit us where it matters. The enthusiasm from the MHA staff at an all-time high, and it immediately reflected as the final season began. All Might vs All For One kicking off with a bang. Hagakure got her big moment combining with Aoyama, the hero killer and the former greatest hero, teaming up because that's just how desperate the situation was. But it wasn't enough. All Might's refusal to die back then would put him in another instance of dancing with death, and God knows Horikoshi loves putting Deku in the toughest predicaments ever. The entire world is watching movie characters making their way to a front row seat to it all, and in the most critical moment for a start of a season, All Might's life would hang in the balance. My Hero Academia has always created many phrases to go along with certain peaks of the story. Go beyond, smashing the future, win to save, and save to win. And with so many factors contributing to the war, it would come down to the wind blows. Every shonen series has a moment where the anime community stands up out of respect in unison for the peak they have witnessed. It is a reminder that impact can be created at any time, and it can be explosive. Bakugo's journey has been one of the aspects that people cannot slander right even if they wanted to. From his high horse to his humbling, his growth, reflection, and acceptance. And then his ultimate sacrifice put him in a position to be the wild card of the final battle. When he was benched back during weekly serialization, we knew that he would return when it mattered most. But episode 3 really showed just how much love there is for this character. Years ago, you could never imagine him taking Deku's hand for help, but now in this moment where his character arc is reaching both its peak and completion, and the life of his idol is on the line, all him and Deku could do was act. Immediately jumping into the fray, eye contact, speaking 1,000 words as none needed to be uttered, and what would follow would be one of, and for many, the best episode of My Hero Academia. All sorts of talented animators and excitement being advertised the night before the episode, and there is no better feeling than seeing resounding anticipation. The presentation at its peak, the combo of both gear shift and explosion, sending Bakugo flying, carrying the hopes and prayers of thousands on his shoulders. It were as if you were watching a star of hope flying to shatter the worst possible future imaginable, and with all the effort put in to keep his return under wraps, I knew there was something special brewing for his moment. The strengths of the series were all played with the best deck of cards imaginable, an incredible OST from Hayashi, the best of the best, passing a baton between scenes and cuts. One by one, all of those who made this possible announced their participation, and I myself couldn't believe it even though I was bracing for it. For quite a long time, you would hear about how controversial these moments were, and sure, that opinion may still stick in hindsight. But in the moment where your adrenaline is pumping, your gaze is stuck in awe, and you see the anime-only crowd absolutely blown away, with them also hoping and praying that Bakugo gets there on time, you felt like one of those people in the crowd watching what would be the greatest rescue of all time. We know how Horikoshi absolutely loves his callbacks, and as we remember the events of Season 3, we are reminded of the agony and frustration Bakugo felt deep down about All Might's retirement. Even though it wasn't his own will that brought the final battle at Kamino, his position was at the center of it all. We know that he is not one to make up excuses, that the only thing that matters is the ultimate victory by whatever circumstances there were. So in this moment where all would be decided by his course of action, you couldn't help but to hope. Even though the final battle had many highs and lows, even though I know the complications around his state of limbo was not ideal, when you witnessed all the love, all the art, all the hype showcased for Bakugo, you don't even think about those low moments, but instead embrace nothing but the present. And so despite all that we had come to feel, whether positive or negative, just maybe deep down, Horikoshi was still doing something so incredibly right. This was the Bakugo episode, and he shined for the entirety of it. Bro had his own honored one moment and everything. The kid was going so fast, he sent himself flying into a building, in which Jason Yao, who animated that section, would blow up his own desk in the middle of the scene for the laughs. His speed incomprehensible, his parents watching every moment, and from here on out, it was all or nothing. Bakugo versus All For One and Deku versus Shigaraki. The staff sticking the landing on one of the coolest spreads in the series, and the MHA team refused to let up off the gas. All For One's backstory had direction that would have made the Season 5 era of the community shocked in disbelief, and even then, the episode gave Bakugo the finisher of all time, reminding everyone that this is a story that is beyond just one person now, paralleling the United States of Smash animation with unanimous praise, and even reactors were saying to get that baby out of here, sticking the All Might pose in his own exhausted way, and at last we arrived at the final one-on-one. The convo that occurred during Season 6 among the users is one of the most key moments regarding Deku's character. As much as One For All as a power can be superior in a brawl, it was never intended to be something wielded just for that. To save someone, even if it meant the embodiment of destruction, was the lengths Deku was willing to take it. We learned from PLW that in a battle of endurance, the result would not be ideal, and so it begged the question, just how far would you go to reach that crying child, and what exactly would you be willing to sacrifice to do so? Out of everything I have mentioned, Deku giving up One For All is at the mountaintop of divisiveness. This was a choice that would ricochet into a lot of different conversations, but at the heart of it all, we looked at the idea of sacrifice. Both body and soul had to be committed to see this through, and through the bloody conflict, the overlay form would emerge. It's incredible just how crucial a utility quirk like Black Whip would become, and through all the dodging, the clawing, the punching, the bleeding, the rest of the world would not have the luxury to look away. Just like Bakugo's rescue, so many people were watching as the fate of the world was in Deku's hands. And for this timid kid to go from zero to absolute hero, this is how Deku would leave his mark on history. His agenda may have not been known by everyone, but with every punch, we saw him get closer and closer to the root of the issue. Shigaraki's origin is surrounded by so much pain, and all of it has been brought out by this long intertwined story of brothers. Even with reaching the core of all this sorrow, there were still people Shigaraki could not afford to let down. He had his own reasons to be a hero, even if it meant a hero for the villains. We must always remember that the League of Villains will always be people at the end of the day, and to disregard that would be to deny their aching hearts which spearheaded their actions. Talk no Jutsu was not going to work here, and personally, I did like this idea. What was important was to make sure that Deku knows. To turn a blind eye and feign ignorance is what reality suffers from on a daily basis. And if everyone could spare even a shred of understanding and empathy, then maybe there can be more terrible futures prevented, at least least that's one train of thought. You know, the irony of Shigaraki calling Bakugo a roach, and yet All For One being twice as obnoxious about dying and staying dead is certainly an amusing thought, and once again the momentum has shifted. That moment of vulnerability would be the avenue All For One needed to rise once more, but now there is no One For All or Yoichi to get back. All this plotting from decades ago would start to crumble, and this is the final stage where winner takes all. In the most Avengers-like way possible, all of those from close and afar would rally behind Deku, his determination inspiring so many and setting up what would be the most important sprint of a lifetime. The Rising Name chapters would be the format to signify the greatest moments of a character within the story, all their growth and actions coming ahead to cap off everything that they stood for. And from the day we were introduced to Deku's origin, we've been waiting so patiently for the day the world would be behind him, to rise to that spot of greatness. And when we recall how Heroes Rising was a scrapped idea for the ending of the story, we can see just how much more Horikoshi leaned into the idea of this being a collective final push from all. And for the final time, we all root for Deku to do his damn best. 10 years later, and we are once again at the day where a shonen main character is reaching his climatic victory. Deku's final sprint is the episode I dreaded knowing it would signify the end, and yet looked forward to the most knowing the emotional punches that MHA has delivered all these years were going to be thrown at their hardest. The build-up the week of enhanced the anticipation, from the brief climax trailer to the new key visual with hashtags and messages from around the world, coming from all sorts of people cheering Deku on. Even a whole Deku profile picture army that even just for a day would sweep you up and get you prepared for the big moment. And of course, the MHA staff rallying to the best of their ability as well. As I've said before, this final stretch was an effort from all. And whether it was heroes both big or small, or those from the sideline who helped mend injuries, everyone made way and cleared a path for Deku to reach All For One. And one by one, the callbacks, parallels, and even new content made way throughout the episode. And what is a climax if not for Yusei Run to come in for the final time? Fitting considering we are running here. I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with emotion as the main character, who would get so much flack for his emotions, now has the entire world cheering him on, and from the movie characters to people around the world and peers, reactors, and of course the community itself, this will be a day that unites all of us. There are so many fans who have waited for this day, so many who have contributed to this experience that is a weekly shonen story, and this is what anime is all about. The animation did its thing, the voice acting shined all the way to the end, giving so many people even just a single line that held so much weight in this finale, and truly, what else could you ask for knowing the heartbeat of MHA? There are so many reasons to be emotionally tore up about this episode, but what truly got me was seeing Deku's mom towards the end, going from being unable to change your child's circumstances to being able to cheer him on in the end, even with the same type of sprint Deku had that started it all. That is how you send the message. With the same type of windup, just like his very first smash as well, All For One would finally meet his end, and at last we could truly say the day has come. It's an incredible thing to see so many people care about the climax, knowing the perception of the series has been a roller coaster. So many different creators ended up coming full circle in the end, and although I'm not a spiteful person, I can imagine that if you hate this series right now, it's a very annoying time to be on the internet. From the ratings to the humor, once again I say that everywhere you look, MHA was cooking. And if something you love is coming to an end, then this is how it should be. At the same time, this wasn't just an ordinary climax for me. It would also signify a farewell to my youth as well, and knowing all the things that have happened over these many years, I am incredibly thankful to have been able to see this to the end. The end of an era has arrived once again, and in an instant, the clear sky made way, and the battle finally came to a close. So, we are at the final few minutes of the video here, so I figured why not give one final heart-to-heart to ensure I truly leave nothing unsaid. First off, I want to apologize for any of the voice inconsistencies throughout the video. On top of doing a lot of retakes up until this morning, there was a lot of hardware changed out over these last few months, and there was a lot of trial and error trying to get things back to the way they were. That is entirely on me, but hopefully everything came out pretty clear. As for the video itself, ever since I heard Yusei run for the first time back in season 1, I knew that I was going to make a video like this someday. Of course, I didn't know who I would meet or what experience I would go through till this very day, but a lot of it shaped my experience with the story, and this video is a testament to that. I want to make sure people understand that in no shape or form am I trying to inspire emotions like revisionism or to beat anybody down looking at my season 5 section. A lot of people associate me with being a positive person, but I'm not exclusively positive or negative, I'm just me. This is purely my story with My Hero Academia, and I sought out to tell it entirely with the hope that people would connect to it even if it's not for the entirety of it, in which led me to call upon the aid of many talented creators who have made this video possible, and in which I give my personal thanks at the very end of the video. As for the elephant in the room, let's focus on the final 2 seasons. I know that there is a large audience out there that is disappointed with the final act of MHA and that is absolutely disgusted with the way I just sat here and talked about season 7 and 8. You probably feel like anime onlys have been tricked because the anime, well, did its job, potentially surprised on how I haven't said anything substantial about those said controversies that I mentioned back in the split section. Things like Bakugo and the edge shot surgery, All Might's return, Shigaraki's conclusion, Toga's conclusion, Deku giving up his quirk, etc, etc. To put it frankly, I think trying to cover a lot of the issues people took with the final act would have led the video in the direction of a tangent that overall would have just killed the momentum. I intentionally took time to talk about the season 5 atmosphere with knowing I would get back on track going into the final act. Again, there's plenty of other content that I've made in which I talk about the issues I took with the story, so feel free to go check those out if you really care about what I have to say. The season 5 section would have been a lot longer had I included every single issue off the top of my head, and even then, not everybody agrees obviously. Also, I'm just tired, you know what I mean? You can call it inconsistent or lazy on my part, but I'm okay with the fact that in the end, I did my best to consider all types of perspectives, and I respected them even if I disagreed. I certainly won't miss manga leaks, as a lot of misinformation that still plagues the internet till this day was because of it. I especially won't miss people getting up in arms about a staff list and all the comparisons that come with it, and most importantly, I will definitely not miss people treating leakers' words as the Bible and people forgetting to think for themselves because a leaker spoke. I think a lot of people forget that even if it's just a leaker, it's still one person among billions of people who have an opinion on an episode. They are not special or better than anybody just because they have a piece of information that they probably shouldn't have their hands on anyway. MHA was a very big case of this, but quite frankly, any manga series that was getting leaked back then all suffered at different times. I can sit here and talk about how I wish certain things are better or coulda, shoulda, and all that other nonsense, but at the end of the day, sometimes with anime, reality hits you hard. With this anime adaptation, you could clearly see the limits and the heights it could reach. And as shonen anime is in an era now where everything is hypercritical and constantly compared among each other, I'm glad that now we can finally put the exaggeratives and performances that people love to put online when it comes to animation to rest. Even though I enjoyed the season, my interaction with the MHA community never really returned to full form after the season 5 stuff. Some things never changed, and even till the end I would see the behavior that reminded me why I stepped away in the first place. I've always been a tell it how it is person, and I hate the exaggeratives that come with being in a shonen community. People really lose their grip on reality when it comes comes to these fictional stories. If anything, I'm kinda glad that the stories I do enjoy now are stories that people don't really care about much. So now I get to really reclaim some peace. With that being said, I owe some final thanks to you all out there who have played multiple parts leading to this day. For my friends who knew me before I even uploaded my first YouTube videos, such as Jay, Seki, and Dally, I thank you guys for being some of the first people to really embrace me as a friend. And if you guys are watching this video all these years later, just know I'm thankful to call you my friends in this lifetime. For all of those out there who have gotten to know me through MHA, those who have stayed up with me late on Discord discussing all the group chats, or even interacting with me at all throughout the years, I thank you as well. Through highs and lows, I will always cherish the memory of being connected through a story like this, and I hope that my presence was something that you didn't mind as well. To all of those who enjoyed MHA to the very end, I'm glad you did, and if at any point in this video that you smiled, got emotional, or resonated with anything I said, then I did my job, and please be sure to share your final thoughts or even your entire story with MHA in the comment section down below. I'll be reading everything over these next couple of weeks. Finally, for those who walk away from MHA disappointed, I'm sorry that it didn't go the way you would have liked, and just know I understand. It is my hope that at some point in the video you were able to smile or think back on fonder memories to a time where you did enjoy the series and think to yourself that it wasn't all that bad. I may not be able to satisfy everybody, but I can try and meet you all halfway. One thing for certain is that I have a long road ahead of me. It is my hope to do this content thing for quite some time, and with everything I've learned through this experience, I will be applying it to become even greater in the future. I know the direction I'm headed in, I know the creators I want to meet and work with someday, and I'm glad that this story could light this fire inside of me and serve as my foundation. There is no doubt in my heart, I will always love My Hero Academia, and from now into the future, that'll never change with me. And as the dust settled, the blue sky appeared once more, and we enter the prologue finally, a funny thought entered my mind, and that's, man, all of us are grown up now, aren't we? As I began finishing this video, I kept thinking to myself if I said enough or said too much, but quite frankly, there was never a wrong way for me to tell my story. In the end, society began to mend its own wounds, and Class 1A grew up. I know that for many, there was a lot of people that were satisfied, and for others, there's a lot more to be desired. And overall, I truly hope Horikoshi reflects on his experience with MHA so that if and when he returns, he will be able to hopefully conquer on those shortcomings. But I find myself at peace with the fact that Deku continues to not only live out his dreams, but inspire new ones in the classroom as well. He was always more than a wielder of One for All, and the best part is that he wouldn't be alone in more ways than one. Thus brings us to the end. But I guess in the end, what I'm really trying to say with all of this is thanks for the ride, Horikoshi, and farewell, My Hero Academia.